appreciate this text very much. In some sense, because it is the ultimate summation. We're reading a text called the Shivastotravali. And this Shivastotravali was written in the late 10th century, meaning in the 970s. It is the work of the author of another text called the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Hridayam, which is maybe the most rigorous and elegant philosophical statement that has ever been made anywhere. The Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karikas are the end point of maybe 700 years of Pratyabhijna tradition, which starts somewhere in the 2nd century in Benares, and then becomes elegantly completed in the 10th century in Srinagar, because by then Kashmir was the richest place on the planet, or one of them, and had been for a long time vigorously promoting the work on Pratyabhijna, which began in the 4th century when the rulers of Kashmir invited an ancestor of Abhinavagupta, who is the most famous Kashmirian Shaiva author and the grand pupil of Utpaladeva, who's written this. It is extraordinary to me that a person who has written such a rigorous and kind of academic text has then later in his life come to his completion statement, which is the Shivastotravali, in which basically he denies the value of all the work he's previously done in his life. And here's a guy who's probably, at that period in his life, as famous as anybody in all of India in the religious and political spheres, because in traditional society, religion is used as a pathway for advancement within societies, but it's also, and that's because of its efficacy as a tool of political manipulation. So Utpaladeva comes to this place where he steps out of all of his ambitions and to do a work, really to bring a work like Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karikas to completion, you have to be ambitious. You cannot, wander in this world of academic rigor, and complex language and philosophical concepts, and try to bring it to life without ambition is just impossible. How will you persevere and survive in it? So to have accomplished that, with all of the honor that comes along with it, and then deny its usefulness, is a very interesting statement. And one that, he makes it very intentional, and I think it's something we need to pay attention to. Certainly, at this stage in my life, sure this is true for some of you. What was that all about? Is a question that endures. What was it about? What was all of that work and struggle and what was it about? Why did we do it? I mean, there is an answer, but and that is in some sense fitting in relationship to this text, but it's not an easily accessible answer. So the first thing I want us to do with this is come back to the point that he makes at the end of his first stanza. His first stotra, where he says, "How wonderful is it that the mind, O Lord, which is in essence the seed of all suffering, when doused with the nectar of devotion, bears the magnificent fruit of beatitude." And in a way that, with each of these sutras, I keep having difficulty thinking about moving on to the next, because in a way, each of them is a complete statement in itself. But I'm not sure I emphasized enough in our last meeting that in in Utpaladeva's worldview, each mind is like a ray of the sun in relationship to the mind of Shiva, which is the source of the phenomenal world. Each mind is always and forever connected to the one mind, which is yet again, which rests, that one mind that rests in universal consciousness, which is the very ground of everything. And in our sadhanas, in all of our practices that we do, we are awakening our own mind, the mind that, is the repository of the all experiences that we identify as our own, including the experience of our body, which, as I have pointed out to you many times, is not at all what we imagine it to be, this body. This body is not what we think it is. First of all, the very first thing is this body isn't mine. This body is not mine. If it were mine, it would, first of all, probably be about, 30 years younger. But it's not mine. I have no say over any of it. And this body, whatever it is only known to me through the mind, which is its fundamental ground. And this life that I have that we think of, this is my life. This isn't our life. We don't own any of it. And we can't control any of it. There's nothing that we can do. I always hear people talk about my this and my that, and I think, oh my. What does that mean? We are like tiny little fleas riding on the back of a massive dragon. And imagine that, the life of life itself, and imagining somehow that we hold the reins to something, which we do not. And it's ridiculous in a way. And Utpaladeva, and all of the really nice and sweet ways in which he is kind of coaxing us to that recognition, is surmised by him in the last stanza of the first stotra, by pointing out that, all of our suffering is a function of our own mind, which, through the nectar of devotion is dissolved. And that nectar of devotion is the nourishment which brings about very rapidly the maturity of our soul and the shedding of its husk of ignorance, and so that it enters into a state of complete maturity. Maturity which is characterized by an experience that is, he calls it nectar, he calls it bliss, he calls it joy, he calls it beauty. So behind all of the questions in our heads about what is this and what is that and how will I navigate and what will I do, behind that relentless repetition of what I call the mantra of stupidity. The mantra of stupidity is the mantra everybody repeats from the moment they're born, which is, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to me? That is underlying 99% of everything that's going on in our head all day, every day. What's going to happen to me? And Utpaladeva is saying, stop with all this discursive thinking, stop with the mantra of stupidity, and understand that behind the veil of the thoughts in your mind and behind the next veil, which is the feelings of fear and anxiety that reside in your heart, the Lord, Shiva, is ever sitting. The very essence of consciousness itself is sitting, looking back at you. That ultimate reality is, and the ultimate abundance that is its quality, is ever resting within you underneath the thoughts and feelings. And it is simply the recognition of that presence within you which naturally gives rise to a release of tension and a flow of creative energy, which is, both abundance on the one hand and pure joy on the other, that releases us from all of the entanglements that we have in ourself with our interaction to this crazy-ass world that we are constantly called to navigate. So I'm just going to read the second song to you, and I'll stop and comment as I go along a little bit, because, you know, there's a lot of cultural context in these that we're not familiar with, and then there's a lot of repetition that we don't really need to go over. But we might. He says, "May you be glorified, O essence of consciousness, appearing in all the forms of such as Agni, fire, the moon, the sun, Brahma, Vishnu, the mobile and the immobile. May you be glorified, O mighty fire, brilliantly lustrous from smearing the ashes that remain of the universe, your soul oblation." Now this is a reference which he will continue with. The mighty fire is the fire of the cremation ground, the fire that consumes this body. The smearing of ashes is what any very dedicated Shaiva practitioner does, one who either lives in the cremation ground or one who, travels through the cremation ground. And generally in India, the thing about the cremation ground has its multiple meanings. The cremation ground is that junction between the material and the immaterial. That is the place where, the body and the soul and the ultimate reality dwell all at once in the same moment. It is a place where the great beyond is accessible. It's like a portal, but not exactly, because it's just a place where the great beyond is accessible. And the yogis would go there and stay because at the time of the funeral, there is a ceremony called a puja, which is done for the deceased, before the body is burned, which offers food, principally rice cakes. And the yogis would go there, and after the body is burned, they would consume the food because they were guaranteed at least a part of a meal there, or some nourishment. And so, the cremation ground became a place where Shaiva yogis gathered. And part of the term is vrata. Part of their lifestyle commitment is to cover themselves in the ashes of the dead. And this is a whole nother reference to Shiva. The dead are attached to their bodies. One of the reasons why in India they burn bodies is to disperse them, so there's nothing left for the soul to be attached to, and then thus forcing it to move on and not to linger in this world as any kind of spirit at all. They will put the ashes in the river immediately. Most cremation places are on rivers. And the ashes get swept into the river at the end, and unless, of course, the people are poor and can't afford enough wood to burn the whole body, then whatever is left gets swept in the river, which is how you get dead bodies in the river. I used to have this friend who was an Agori. He lived on the Ganges between Hardwar and Rishikesh in a cliff wall, a kind of a cave, except that I think he dug it himself. And I would go with Kapil to visit him. He was a very unusual person. And one day we were visiting him. We used to have to leave. We would stay in Rishikesh and we'd leave to see him about 4 a.m, and we'd bring 2 cartons of cigarettes, and we would bring 4 bottles of whiskey. And when we found him, which wasn't always, when we found him, we would, give him the things that we brought him, and he'd immediately crack open one of the bottles of whiskey and start going at it. Well, in this little cave that he stayed in, he had 5 or 6 chickens and a couple of dogs. And I remember I haven't seen him in a while, and the last time I saw him, he had a bloody bandage around his waist. And so, of course, we asked him, what's going on? And he said, he picked up a sword that he had there in his cave, and he said, I ran it through me. And I said, well, why'd you do that? He said, somebody brought, one of his devotees had come with a big illness, and in order to cure it, he had to make a blood offering, and he offered his own blood for it, and she was cured. And then he took a rag and wrapped it around himself as a bandage. I have no idea if he survived that or died from it. I don't know. I don't think he cared much. While we were sitting there, we're sitting there talking to him. He was, our backs were kind of to the river, and all of a sudden he jumps up and he dashes toward the river, and he tore ass down around the corner, and we couldn't see what he was doing. And about 4 or 5 minutes later, he comes back around. He's up to his calves in the river, and by the hair, he is dragging a dead body, which he had seen floating down the river and ran out to get it. And he drags it back up, and he pulls it up on the beach, says something like, you don't find one of these every day. I have to And it was a body which was partially burned, but had been, basically only some poor person only had enough money to pay for enough wood to burn 15% or 20% of the body, and the rest of it just got thrown in the river. So he dragged it up on the river, and he was going to do a typical Agori sadhana, which is a meditation practice in which he sits on the corpse. And he was thrilled. So to douse yourself in the ashes of a dead body, of a burnt body, is a typical, behavior. It's called a vrata. And the term vrata means, the things that a sadhu does to identify himself, both from his in his philosophical perspective and his practice lineage and his lifestyle. So part of the vrata of agoris is never to cut their hair and to pile it all up on their head and to douse them, cover their bodies with the ashes of the burned. So that's what he's referring to here, and it's not uncommon at all. And of course, we're horrified by these things, and if anybody in the American yoga movement actually did any of this stuff, they'd be instantly canceled. Right? Yeah. Another thing about this guy is one time I asked him, "Where were you born?" He said, "I have no idea." I said, "Who were your parents?" He said, he didn't know. He said, basically his guru had kidnapped him from his parents when he was, 1 or 2, and kept him with him till he died. And so the guy had no idea where he was from. He had no idea. He thought maybe he was from Bihar. But Bihar is a big state. It could have been a lot of places. That's sort of what he thought. But he didn't know. This is a practice, of course, that we would find horrible, horrible, horrible. And it probably wasn't all that easy for the guy, but we have no idea because at least he had, the company of somebody who was clearly accomplished, and he had the accomplishment of the sadhana that he was trained in, which might be a lot more than, a very poor Adivasi who had nothing whatsoever and was committed to a life of servitude. We just don't know. And all of our ideas about right and wrong and up and down and left and right, and what ought to be and what, are just so culturally informed and constipated by, the media bubble, if you will. But not just media, this is long ago. The propaganda that we are constantly being bombarded by. We have ideas about what's better and worse and right and wrong and up and down and left and right. But the truth is the reality of our life and the lives we're surrounded by, the lives of the people that we share our life with, have nothing whatsoever to do with all the shit that we think is up and down and right and left and good and bad. It is what it is. And coming to accept that isness and to release it with acceptance is the beginning of our capacity to go beyond the thoughts and feelings that are constantly afflicting and constraining us to a direct connection with our own source that allows us the strength to endure in the context that we have been blessed with. And each life, no matter what it looks like, is a life that comes from Shiva, which comes from a splendor that is beyond our capacity to imagine. Each life and everything about each life is a blessing that when we are capable of holding that space beyond thought and feeling, becomes a life that bestows on us strength and clarity and endurance and abundance and ultimately pure joy. Each life. India is an extraordinary place that, because of its poverty, has sustained a cultural diversity which is still, really mind-boggling and difficult to wrap one's head around. And there is all this, constant cultural interplay going on that's very difficult to sort out, even if I've spent at least 3 months a year in India every year. Well, I didn't for the last few years, but until 2020, I spent at least 3 months a year there every year since 1973. And, while I have paid attention to sorting out cultural influences, it is tangled because you have thousands of years of cultural and political and religious diversity interacting with itself over and over and over again, and people are so poor that there's no point in stealing it or trying to overcode it, and so it's persisted, and it's very amazing. But it doesn't easily lend itself to absorption in the yoga culture of America, because most of it, is grounded in experience that is far older and more challenging than any of the people, any of the life experience that we have had or is even available to us through our immediate ancestors. Wearing the ashes of dead bodies is not something you're going to, really bump into much in the yoga studios of Los Angeles and Manhattan and San Francisco and even Santa Cruz. May you be glorified, O mild one, and that's in contrast to O mighty fire. May you be glorified, O mild one, smooth and brimming with the finest nectar. O terrible one who burns away the entire universe, may you be glorified. O Mahadev, O Rudra, Shankara, Maheshvara, O Shiva, embodiment of the mantra, may you be glorified, O fire of Shiva, O dreadful one who, having absorbed the melting fat of the pieces of the three world, remain yet auspicious. There is another, what we have here is, he's talking about both the most peaceful and sublime and beautiful and delicious at the same moment as you are absolutely the most horrifying and terrible. And the reference to the melting fat of the pieces of the three worlds is a reference again to the cremation ground and the cremation fire and the burning of a body, because the melting fat is the melting fat of a human body which drips on the ground next to the cremation fire as the body is being consumed. And the contact with a dead body, at least for the Brahmins and the Kshatriya, the upper classes in India, is considered to be the most defiling of circumstances, which is to be avoided at all costs. It is like the ultimate impurity. Shaiva yogis go into the cremation ground specifically to demonstrate the rejection of any notion like pure and impure, or upper class and lower class. And polite society is about the last thing, the absolute last thing that any ardent devotee of Shiva has any interest in at all. The profoundly superficial vanities of the rich and successful are something Shaiva yogis have gone beyond as a very beginning of their life statement. And this kind of discussion from Utpaladeva is fascinating because, in fact, he is a person who has, up at least to some point in the emergence of these songs, he's a person who has been completely immersed in the academy that is the result of the patronage of the royal court of Kashmir. And he, must have most certainly been called upon to navigate its politics over and over and over again. Shiva, having absorbed the melting fat of the pieces of the three world, remains yet auspicious. That's, having spent a lot of time myself in various cremation grounds in India and Nepal and Tibet, it is a metaphor that is meaningful to me. May you be glorified. May the Lord be glorified, the mysterious Shambhu, whose only definition is that he is devoid of all definition. Glory to the imperceptible Lord, the antithesis of the Vedas and the Agamas, and yet the true essence of the Vedas and the Agamas. How is he the antithesis? He is the unspoken essence, the unspoken essence from which every spoken word has poured forth, and he is also the ever-present, ever-available, completely obvious manifestation of the secret of the Vedas and the Agamas, which is said to be revealed. How can that, which is ever present and totally obvious to anybody who's paying attention, actually be revealed? So it is the antithesis and yet the true essence of the sacred scripture of South Asia. Well, actually, as we talked earlier, the earliest written evidence of the Vedas, very strangely, is found in cuneiform script, and has been discovered in the Levant, which is, the area of Israel, northern Israel and Syria and Jordan and Lebanon, has been discovered in the Levant, and it dates way before the earliest written representations of these scriptures in India. And so it's just more evidence that in fact the Vedas were composed in Central Asia and brought into India in the waves of migration from Central Asia that occurred, throughout the northern part of the subcontinent. Glory be to Shambhu, the sole cause of the universe and its only destroyer, who takes worldly form and yet transcends the world. Glory be to Shambhu, who is the consummate beginning, middle, and end, who takes the form of beginning, middle, and end, and who is without beginning, middle, or end. The utterance of your name even once produces the same effect as several virtuous deeds. May you be glorified, O difficult of attainment. Homage to the one who revels always with a band of ghosts in moving and in non-moving forms. May you be glorified, O skull bearer, O essence of consciousness. Again, another reference to the cremation ground, to Shiva as, having many different kinds of spirits that have gathered around and who also comprise the group of his devotees, and who are around him being nurtured by his presence and who act in service to him. This is also a part of the cremation ground culture from which the tantric tradition has, or at least the powerful parts of it in India. I personally think that, in fact, tantric culture emerges from village shamanism, and that, the cremation ground, early village shamans had part of their function was funerals and cremation ground dwelling, and for various purposes. And so, Shiva's considered to be, constantly in the company of all manner of ghosts and spirits. May you be glorified, O skull bearer, is a direct reference to the foundations of this particular tradition of Shaivism, because skull bearer is called Karpalika. And the Karpalikas are a lineage of practitioners that arise, from the earlier Pashupatas, the worshippers of Pashupatinath, which is another name of Shiva, and who become, the Karpalikas become the ground in which the worship of the goddess and the worship of Shiva finds its fusion. And the Karpalikas are the earliest recognized source of non-dual Shaivism, of which this text is a very elegant statement. But, the Pratyabhijna system of philosophy that Utpaladeva has written before is like the ultimate academic statement of non-duality. It is the ultimate argument that everything is, a part of everything else. Homage to that wondrous Shambhu, the deluding one, who is yet pure and clear, the hidden one who has yet revealed himself, the subtle one whose form yet takes the form of the whole universe. May you be glorified, O omnipotent one, whose many acts bewilder, whose play is to destroy the world maintained by Brahma, Indra, and Vishnu. Whose play is to destroy the world. And so, all of our efforts to weave a world, to fabricate a world, are inevitably to be destroyed. And so, perhaps cutting to the chase and attending to the essence is a happier journey than the relentless effort to weave and repair and weave and repair and weave and repair and weave and repair that constitutes the basic nature of an ordinary human life. May you be glorified, O Hara, fathomless ocean on whose shores the mere wanderer acquires your special powers. Anybody who authentically, even casually, but authentically is devoted to Shiva automatically is blessed with some siddhis, some powers. Homage to Shambhu, resplendent lotus, dwelling unsullied in the midst of the thick mire of illusion. Well, all we need to do is, open our computers to be exposed to the thick mire of illusion that is the nature of this world. It just, even in my lifetime, the thick mire of illusion has become thicker. Homage to the auspicious one, the pure, the protector, the adorned soul, the beloved, the highest truth, the best of all things. This is in contrast, of course, to the terrible and the horrible and the destructive. Homage to Shambhu. And I think basically, one of the things is when we give, he's saying here, is when we give up this basically completely useless effort to, keep our finger in the dike of our life, keeping, trying to maintain and build an effort that is doomed to failure. When we give that up and we attend straight to the source, we come to the place where, we are flooded with the experience of the joy of pure being and simply being alive. And it is this experience of simply being alive which is ultimately meaningful, which floods us, with joy, and out of that joy, which, gives rise to an inspiration, which may lead us to create and to act and to do and to serve and to do and, to experience a life which we acknowledge is beyond, our own individual creative capacity, is a life that is not our life, but a life that is flooded by the abundance of our contact with a subtle and yet completely apparent when we switch our brains on, a subtle power which, is unstoppable in its manifestation of the world and in its reabsorption of the world. It is the best of all. He is, he, she, because he and she are united in this. Shiva is at once masculine and feminine. He is the he and she is the goddess, and they are the same. Homage to Shambhu, the one who is ever bound and yet enjoys eternal liberation, who is beyond bondage and liberation. In this vast expanse of the three world, whose whole essence is ludicrous, you are the sole enjoyer of perpetual delight. May you be glorified, O one without second. May you be glorified, O Sarva. Now this is an interesting phrase because Sarva is a very ancient name of the goddess, which refers to the total abundance that is the goddess. Sarva. And Sarva is also the root of the surname Sharma, which, and it's a variation, the word Sharma is a variation on the surname Sharma, which, is extremely common in North India among Brahmins. O Sarva, who is the essence of the right-handed path, who is the essence of the left-handed path, who claim every sect and no sect at all. There's a guy who is a meditation teacher in LA, who I know, who a couple of years ago told me that a woman who is a meditation teacher who now lives somewhere in Northern California but who used to live in LA, he told me that she told him that I was a left-handed tantric. And I'm not sure what he was trying to do in telling me I was being accused of being a left-handed tantric, because that's how it kind of came across. But I said to him, I have no idea what you are talking about. I have heard the term left-handed and right-handed thrown around in India, but mostly in America, it's thrown around in relationship to various practitioners. But, I use my left hand, I use my right hand, I use sometimes no hands at all. And I don't know what in the hell that kind of horseshit means. And, I have met all kinds of sadhus. I've met Gauris, I've met Shakta Brahmins, I've met Brahmins. I met dozens of different sects of Brahmins. At this point, none of it has any meaning whatsoever. And that kind of analysis is completely useless. And, we should go beyond it. And that's what, even in the 9th century, Utpaladeva is saying here. Right-handed, left-handed, no hands at all. This is Shambhu. May you be glorified, O Deva, who can be worshipped in any manner, in any place, in whatever form, at all. And that is because the fundamental act of worship is twofold. One, worship simply means giving something your wholehearted attention. Giving something your, I should say rather than wholehearted, undivided attention. That is worship. Giving something your undivided attention. And when you give your own essence, your own undivided attention, the joy that springs up from inside you and shines out through your eyes and your ears and your nose and your mouth and your feet to the field of experience that you are immersed in, transforms you and your awareness and your experience into a garden of delight. And so, form doesn't matter, place doesn't matter. There is nothing that matters except in this, except worship, which is not a big, profound, dramatic thing. It is so simple. It is simply giving. That dimension of you, beyond thought and feeling, your undivided attention. And in doing so, what you will experience is that, your energetic essence, the energetic structure which underlies your physical form, this energetic structure which is the essence of mind in each of us, will become activated. Wah, it turns on. It resonates ever more loudly and more loudly and more loudly. Glory to you, O Shiva, O Shambhu, O Shankara, Mahadev. And perhaps because we're in a different culture, maybe we say, glory to you, oh, well, I don't know, Trump? Glory to you, oh, Trump and Stump and Biden and, I don't know what we would, our culture is so fragmented. But we will say, glory to the wind and the sky and the light and the rain and the rivers and the oceans. Bravo to it all. Right? Turning our attention within ourselves to that place inside us that is beyond our struggle, our confusion, our doubt, beyond our subtle self-hatred. To the place where beauty resides in each of us, awakening and calling forth and magnifying that beauty over and over and over again. It can be done anywhere. It can be done in any way. It is, in fact, that the sweetness in our heart is the only offering ever that has any real efficacy. And every offering that we make other than the sweetness of our heart is either a reflection of that sweetness and an expression of it, or it is absolutely a waste. For instance, when I'm sitting in the Haben, if I am not on each offering that I am making, it's called an oblation, each oblation that I am making, if I am not ever more increasingly emptying myself of myself and becoming simply in that moment a vehicle for the transmission of sweetness into the space in all of the various actions, through all the various actions that I am engaged in, then I'm just burning up shit for no good reason. If I'm not doing that, then that act is completely inauthentic and totally meaningless. And so, in all the forms, whatever form we gather and we connect in is, if we understand it as a form through which we are connecting and expressing that fundamental experience of worship, of sacredness, then it's wonderful, and if it's not that, then it's completely just jerking off. And over and over and over again, what Utpaladeva is saying, the subtext, and I talked about this a little bit last week with you. The subtext here is that contact, my definition of yoga, my definition of worship, my definition of just about everything is contact, alignment, and flow. Contact, alignment, and flow is sacredness, and isolation and alienation and the creation of ever more dense boundaries is the very essence of the profane. May you be glorified, O Deva, who can be worshipped in any manner, in any place, in whatever form. May you be glorified, O granter of boons, who are served by those aspiring for liberation, and whose boundless depths of beauty dispel all affliction. Just said that. May you be glorified, O Lord, who forever fill the three worlds with infinite beatitude and rejoicing in eternal celebration. Continuation of the same thought. Homage to your terrifying sense goddesses, whatever they enjoy is all in offering to you. In this, we're referencing multiple levels of worship. Infinite beatitude, homage to the terrifying sense goddesses, whatever they enjoy is all in offering to you. And basically, this is saying whatever you enjoy, whatever brings joy into your life, whatever activates that dimension of you which is beyond, suffering, is an appropriate pathway for engagement of that within you which is beautiful and which is infinitely abundant. What is beautiful and what is pleasurable, is seen in a completely different context than ordinary religion, where the effort is to, I've sort of come to the conclusion that all the rules, religious or otherwise, are about two things. One is personal safety, and the other is the stability of community. So the subtext here is that personal safety is perfectly fine, but not highly valued within the context of the Shaiva traditions. Of course, if you are living in a cremation ground, personal safety is not number one on your list of things that you're concerned about for a number of reasons, but one is, cremation places are definitely not hygienic. In any case, ordinary religion is setting up a system where you are safe and the community is stable. And this is not a concern at all for people who are interested in the truth. You know, this is a concern of people who are completely brainwashed and saturated in fear, and who absolutely are incapable of curiosity. In order to come into contact with the truth, you will have to face your own absolute mortality. In fact, it's even worse than that. You know, you have to face the fact that you actually don't exist. And I mean, we are a thing for sure, but our existence as we experience it is mitigated by our brain, which is telling us stuff about ourselves that isn't actually true and doesn't actually work. And it's part of why we keep making the same stupid choices over and over again and banging our head against the wrong walls, actually non-existent walls, over and over and over again. He is encouraging us, Utpaladeva is encouraging us to go beyond such categories. May you be glorified, inaccessible even to the long-haired sages, but those endowed with the spirit of devotion embrace you without difficulty. Those endowed with the spirit of devotion embrace you without difficulty. May you be glorified, vessel of the sweetest nectar, treasury of supreme liberation, attainable far beyond the farthest limits. Far beyond those boundaries that ordinary religion is requiring us to adhere to. You know, and further, he is saying that it is only when we recognize the complete ridiculousness of those boundaries are we able to experience a richness of being that from which we will say to ourselves, my life is saved. Salvation. Salvation is not some otherworldly experience, not according to this view. Salvation is not an otherworldly experience. Salvation does not happen after we die. A statement made emphatic by Kabir. And when he said something like, if you think you're going to get a beautiful apartment in the city of death, you're crazy. Salvation is not for ghosts. Salvation is for the living to be experienced here and now. This is part of a poem by Kabir. He's much later than Utpaladeva. And another interesting fact, I'll diverge for a minute, is that Utpaladeva is, a profound influence on the emergence of all poetry in India, and especially in the 11th and 12th, 13th centuries in far South India, during the Chola dynasty, which follows Kashmir. With the decline of Kashmir, the richest place in the world becomes not far from Madras. The Chola dynasty in India is hugely wealthy, and there's even in the Roman records, there's a note from one of the Chola kings who's writing to the Roman Senate and basically saying, if you don't pay your bill to us in gold, very soon we will cease all shipments of silk and purple dyes to you. They were so rich, they were bossing the Romans around. Utpaladeva's influence is extraordinary, really. And this whole emergence of Nair poets in Madras, they're beautiful. I once did, I did it many times. I did a retreat on poetic literature of the spiritual traditions of India, mystical poetry, we called it, yeah. So we've talked about those Nair poets before, which are really quite wonderful. And Utpaladeva is literally the foundation from which those streams of poetry have flowed. Attainable beyond the farthest limits. Salvation has nothing to do with living in the rules. May you be glorified, O form of the great mantra. Cool and lucid, blessed with exquisite fragrance, brimming with the nectar of the great nectar of immortality. Terror and bliss, terror and bliss, terror and bliss. Both reside in Shiva. The pure awareness beyond thought and feeling that is the essence of each of our existence. The great cloth representing your absolute oneness is full of the nectar of freedom and has not a single spot of color. Homage to your teaching, O Lord. We praise the path of Maheshvara, the thunderbolt against all doubt, the fire of destruction that destroys all misfortune, and the final dissolution of all things inauspicious. May you be glorified, O Deva. Homage, adoration, O protector of the whole universe, supreme Lord of the three worlds, for refuge I come to you alone. That's the second song. After everything is said and done, after all of the bullshit has been burned up, only one thing endures, and that is simple sweetness, the simple joy that is present in each of our hearts as the pure being from which each of us, arises and to which we all subside. And the sooner that sinks in, and the more strongly we hold to that, the easier this merry-go-round will be. Well, somebody asked me early this week what it feels like. What does that devotional state feel like? And I think, the language of Utpaladeva has pretty much covered it, but it feels like such an overwhelming sweetness that, flows from our head and our heart and moves out, moves down our torso and with an experience of warmth and out through our fingers and our toes, into the world that, not only does this mind, all the thoughts dissolve, but the experience of the body, it dissolves, it melts away. And that's part of the illusion that he's talking about when he says melting fat. You know, the experience of the body disappears, and even the experience of all of the struggles and confusion and the experience itself dissolves into a wave of sweetness and beauty that, you know, is the experience from which, you know, those of us who endure in what we call a non-dual conceptual model, you know, will dwell in, having everything washed away and recognizing that, you know, life itself is this sublimely beautiful demonstration of the ultimate reality that, you know, we cannot get in front of or behind or around and ever actually cultivate any context for. It simply washes over and through us and purifies and releases us from every kind of struggle and confusion. This is the power and the effect of contact, alignment, and flow. Connecting to our hearts, bringing our attention to, you know, our body and relaxing it, and our nervous system and activating it and the energetic structure underneath our nervous system and experiencing it flow. And further we go in connection and alignment with our own essence until we dissolve into a puddle of bliss, and we as an individual being no longer exist to struggle. All the teachings about, you know, teachers in India, you know, are an attempt to convey the importance of the practice of contact, alignment, and flow. Because until we can, you know, we have the sort of capacity to connect to our own hearts and hold that space through all of the negative feedback that the world is going to dump on us, because that's what the world exists for. It exists to dump negative feedback on you. That's what it's for. That's what it does, relentlessly, forever, until we, you know, are so strongly established in contact, alignment, and flow that the joy that is constantly, you know, breathing in us and breathing from us and is in fact breathing us, until we're so established in that we cannot be distracted by all the negative bullshit. You know, people, and not just, you know, one person, but people represent for us the opportunity to enter into sacredness through connection and to experience in alignment the extraordinary and emergent qualities of connection that represent the magic of the very being of Shiva. In other words, all siddhis and even the experience of abundance itself arises within the context of contact, alignment, and flow. You know, and so teachers represent, you know, like a constant reminder, like a lighthouse, you know, in a way, shining out a reminder of both a meaningful and safe sense of direction. Safe as possible, nothing is safe, there's no such thing as that. But a meaningful direction and, an opportunity to avoid confusion and, disturbance and distress. That's what teachers do. They don't necessarily have to teach us anything. They shine out. And in this experience of contact, alignment, and flow, in the experience of loving and being loved, we are liberated from any of the structures of self-denial and self-destruction, of self-hatred, that our life in the world is constantly reinforming us of. We are liberated from the unfortunate effects of the negative feedback loops, which are the very nature of our worldly relationships. And so, a teacher is the place where we practice contact, alignment, and flow. A teacher is the place where we practice devotion until we come to the level of strength whereby we are constantly in devotion, and we begin to see that what we were devoted to within the teacher is in fact our own essence radiating out in the form of this person or that being, and our devotion, without ever losing the sense of contact, alignment, and flow and sacredness in the community that we, have been blessed with. Our devotion is more appropriately focused on the whole field of experience that we are in, that our senses are dancing in constantly. And furthermore, I'll just go on to say that the image of dance is embedded in the text, and we'll bump into it in the next sutra. This text is going to bring up a metaphor about people behaving in relationship to this overwhelming experience of sweetness. And there is constantly this dance being done within the text in its discussion of perfect lucidity, of limpid clearness and consummate perspicacity on the one hand. I'm making a kind of a joke and a reference because I have discussed the terminology of limpid clearness and consummate perspicacity on a number of occasions. This phrase comes from a translation of a Tibetan author who's really quite wonderful, a 12th century Tibetan author by a German translator who was translating from Tibetan into English, is trying to come up with exuberant but academic language. And so he uses the phrase limpid clearness and consummate perspicacity. Utpaladeva is demonstrating that the experience of that state of limpid clearness and consummate perspicacity in relationship to the world appears to others as a demonstration of complete madness. Madness. And so if you are concerned with sanity, whether it be your own or others, this will not be, a cremation ground in which you will be able to dance. Ultimately for Utpaladeva, the whole world is a cremation ground. And that is just so true, because in fact, the metabolic fire of your own body is consuming you and everything you touch relentlessly. The real cremation fire is not the fire that they throw your body on at the end of your life. It is the fire that is burning in you right now, which is consuming you moment by moment. And, when we understand this and we live in, the sublime experience of the beauty of that, interplay of creation and destruction, which is happening at the same moment, because that's what the fire is. It is the interplay of creation and destruction. We become released from all the confusion and all the struggle to be sane in a totally insane, field of experience, and to reside in peace and joy in the face of whatever it is that we will be called upon to deal with. This is recognizing that all the suffering that you will ever confront is grounded in your own mind. All the suffering is you. It's your own mind. It's nothing else. It's only your mind. It's not any asshole anywhere, on the planet. It's our own mind. And letting go of what it is that we're holding on to, letting go of whatever it is we're trying to control, releasing ourselves into the worship of, sublime, supreme awareness, is a dance which liberates us, from all the structure and the constraint that is, the nature of worldly life. Okay, going, gone.